Chapter 6 Social Psychology and Genetic Coding as Validators. Social psychology studies how we think based on group influence and the manifestation of that cognition in relation to the effect on social behavior. The basic concept of interactive exchange, we are changed by the environment or environ, and in turn influence, thereby changing the environ, is a validation of the described modality whereby our genetic physical structure remains intact, but certain elements are modified by our reactivity. In order to assess periods of development, we must first look at what stages exist, if any distinction can be made between various age ranges. Nature versus nurture. Before identifying existing stages of development, the notion of nature versus nurture must be explored in order to better understand how societal influence can change the course of adaptive evolution. Group dynamics have an effect on the way we alter our behavior, and as such, choices as to how we are best suited to interact, as well as if we are to procreate and what traits and characteristics survive. The emotional affectivity of the social realm can alter stress levels, ultimately impacting the way DNA replication is performed. This is determined by the conditions under which it occurs. In general terms, a bad trait or mannerism is not necessarily phased out in a single generation, but this occurs over a long period of time, with extensive impact on the transduction of good genes. DNA transcription. DNA transcription is a complicated process full of interactions with mediators and enzymes. To catalyze these actions, hormones are required as activators and inhibitors, with protein chains assembled by a network of intracellular structures and systems. Simply put, genes are passed on while the lifespan of the DNA is shortened through the loss of telomeres, strands of seemingly inactive sequences at the end of the DNA molecule. This changes the way mutations can occur, in that the more times a genetic code is reproduced, the more of a chance there is for mutations and errors in the coding process. Similarly, this too limits how beneficial alterations can occur, both time-limited and structurally dependent on congruence. From generation to generation, behavior changes while intelligence increases, the evolution of humanity giving rise to improved capability and greater capacity. What remains, however, is a physical development structure that seems to stem from a basic timeline-stayed manifestation of genetic coding. It is likely that the developmental stages identified by psychologists reveal not faster but better adaptive changes to cognitive ability, a general ordinance of evolutionary advancement. So this presents a question. Some have discussed things like autism or autistic individuals, autism spectrum disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder as being evolutionary. Others have described it as being counter-evolutionary or a disability. I guess the question is, what fits where and when? So if schizophrenia is a reflection of an earlier time, a different sort of functioning, or autism spectrum is a type of creativity not yet realized, that remains to be seen. The thing that we need to be free of is judgment of individuals who fall into any type of spectrum, because ultimately all of humanity is represented across the entire spectrum. Without that individuality, we don't have our autonomy. Existing social developmental periods. 3 basic periods seem to be the norm when classification of developmental periods is made. The first is infancy, including the prenatal period, this lasting about 3 years. The second is childhood, developed into early, middle, and late or adolescence, which is approximate to the years of 2 through later teenage years, though physiologically beyond well into the 20s or maybe even early to mid-30s. Lastly, adulthood, beginning sometime after puberty, often late teens, early 20s, ends with senescence in most cases, though is relative to mortality. There is further subdivision of each of the three, but these are consistent with the presented models save for one classification. Adolescence and pubescence. Adolescence in Chapter 7 is presented as childhood ages prior to puberty. Pubescence replaces a period in the ages between approximately 11 and 24 years, as the physical development in this range suggests incomplete functional structures until the early 20s, such as rigid features, hormonal balances, and cognitive reasoning. These are more dynamic classifications in the model herein, as they are approximate as opposed to definite, whereby the 15 stages, states, and forms are temporally defined instead. This is explained in greater detail in Chapter 7. And we'll come back around to that. The importance is I've classified adolescence as being prepubescent and pubescence as being the period that exists between the onset of menstruation or androgenetic function and lasting into the 20s, where the basic physical development seems to arrest. Beyond that, there's a manifestation period that lasts into the 30s. And so I think there's three stages: our prenatal, natal, and infancy stages, our childhood through into adulthood, and then our mature stage that lasts until morbidity. Conclusion and summation. As a simple summation, the following describes the classification given to developmental periods as stages of growth in the model herein. Orientation. The first period is comprised of the subperiods of fetal, natal, and infancy. These defined by definitive structural changes, as well as significant life events: conception, birth, and beginning of childhood. Cooperation comes second and is adolescence, pubescence, and adulthood, all marked again by significant events and changes: academic advancement, puberty, and rites of passage. Manifestation is the last and contains a very time-dependent relativity as maturity, senescence, and morbidity. Parenting, social contribution, and retirement are very much related to life experience. This general congruence with the existing modalities gives some validation to a specific subsystem underlying general developmental milestones.